Are you interested in the business of esports? Well, if so, don't go anywhere because that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to another episode of the I Work in Sport live interview. This is the show where we talk to accomplished sport business professionals who come here to share their knowledge, their experience, tips and advice in order to help you succeed in your career. If we're just meeting, my name is João Frigerio. I'm the founder of I Work in Sport, and I want to say thank you for being here with us today. If you're coming back, you already know the drill. It's always the same. You'll know that this is interactive, and I start by asking you to write down in the comments where you're watching from. So, and if this is your first time here, please do so as well. This is really nice to know, and be prepared to interact with this conversation. Your participation is really important and makes it very fun, actually. If you don't know I Work in Sport, we're a platform to help you accelerate your career in sport. If you want to check out a bit more information about us, just go to iworkinsport.com or look for us on LinkedIn too. Also, if you want to interact with some like-minded professionals, people mostly starting their career in sport, but there's a lot of experienced people there too. And if you want to have access to a bunch of cool content, like, for instance, all the presentations from the recent Work in Sport job fair are there, or some live career coaching sessions, just you can join weworkinsport.com. This is our community. You're invited to join. Also, if you're watching it on YouTube, please, hit that like button, subscribe, that whole thing. That helps us, reach more people that might find this interesting. Well, that's enough about us. Let me introduce you my guest today. They'll have the pleasure to talk to Alexander Inglot, who, among other things, is the commissioner of the ESL Pro League. I said among other things because actually he does a few other activities, quite interesting too. He's an investor, he's a strategic advisor, and a podcast host. So we're going to talk about all that with him. So I think during our conversation, we'll also talk about the growth of the sport of paddle. So if you're interested in it as well, stay tuned. Also about his previous role representing European players at the ATP Tour, and actually his whole career path, right? The lessons he learned along the way and all that. So let me invite Alex to join me. Where he is? Well, right after this. Hello, Alex. Welcome. Nice to have you here. How's it going?
Good. Thank you very much. Not too bad at all.
Very well. Well, you saw my introduction. We're going to talk about many things. We're going to definitely talk about esports, the state of esports currently. We're going to talk a little bit about paddle, but this is mostly really about career in sports. So why don't we start there? Maybe give us a brief summary of how you started working with sport. Maybe tell us what you studied, what you did until your current role. Yeah, give us a flavor.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do it briefly, but I'll try. So I started studying law at Oxford University with the idea that the plan was to become a lawyer in order to become a sports lawyer, in order to become a lawyer in-house at a sports organization, in order to become a sports administrator. It kind of felt at the time that I was studying like it was a well-trodden path, that many senior administrators in sports organizations, especially federations, had done. And so that was really the idea. I did law at university. I did a training contract at one of the biggest law firms in London, Denton Wild Sapt. It's now called, I think, S&R Dentons or Dentons. And then I spent 3 years at S.J. Berwin, who no longer exist, but they were also at the time a pretty big law firm based in the City of London. The idea was always to kind of pivot into sports law as kind of the next phase of that cycle. But that was when the credit crunch happened, the big financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And I realized I had to do something really quite radical, because the organic path of trying to get into sports law was almost impossible at the time when very good sports lawyers were losing their jobs. The idea that I could walk into a sports law job not having done any sports law or very little sports law was going to be almost impossible. So that's actually when I did the FIFA Master, 2009, 2010. And off the back of that, spent a year in Mexico working with
Sorry, when you did the master's, was how long after you had graduated from university?
About 8 years, 7 or 8 years.
Okay, right. So it was a good amount of time working as a lawyer.
Yeah, no, I mean the FIFA Master, as I said, I kind of felt like I needed to do something really radical to create a new direction for my career, and I felt like doing a academic conversion, as it were, into the sports industry was what I was going to need to do to try and create some credibility and momentum in my sports business awareness and experience, I guess. So right. I went to Mexico with another FIFA master, Miguel Cuchanal, who was the managing director of Atlanta Football Club, who had just moved from Mexico City, where they had a long history, and they just moved to Cancun and that whole area of Quintana Roo, which didn't have a top division football club. And the task there was for us to try and ingratiate and strengthen our relationship with the local community, with the local people, with the local government, to show that we were long-term tenants in that area and that we were going to really commit to the region. So that was the task there. After about a year there, I came back to London, started working with JTA, which is a small consultancy, but very kind of well respected, especially in the Olympic world, doing PR, communications, and international relations. I worked for clients.
John Tibbs.
Exactly, that's right. So he worked at the time on a Tokyo Olympic bid, on an Istanbul Olympic bid. I worked with him on a Manchester United client relationship. So we did a bunch of work on different really interesting clients. WADA was one of the last clients that we did a comms kind of review or evaluation for. And actually, that was when I realized that I really wanted to do something that linked sports with integrity. And at that time, another FIFA master friend of mine, Frederick Martins, who at the time was kind of in the world around betting and anti-match fixing efforts, told me that was the growing area of integrity. Doping was obviously critical and still important, but had a huge history. Match fixing, especially for betting purposes, was evolving quite rapidly. And so he said, you should take a focus on that. And if you're going to do that, you should really look at Sport Radar. And so long story short, I got a role at Sport Radar working with their integrity team under Andreas Kranek.
Was Frederick already at the IOC at the time?
I don't think so. Not at the time. He joined pretty quickly after that, but I think at the time he wasn't there yet. I might have got the dates wrong, but I think he was not there yet. And so I spent 4 years at Sport Radar, initially focusing on their anti-match fixing efforts, but then really my remit broadened out to being Director of Communications and Public Affairs for the whole business. So betting, data, streaming, anti-match fixing, all of the services that Sport Radar provides to sports federations, police, bookmakers, etc. Then in 2018, I got the opportunity to join the board of the ATP, which was, as far as I was concerned, like a dream job. Sit on the board at the highest table of the ATP, representing the interests of the players, because it was the player council that had elected me to represent their interests on the board. And I spent over 3 years in that position during some incredibly challenging years. Included bringing in new leadership. It included COVID. It included the rise of the PTPA. It included Andrea Gaundenzi's One Vision, dealing with that, governance review and governance changes. So it was an incredibly tough time. The launch of the ATP Cup, the first meeting I had was the launch of the ATP Cup. So it was a true baptism of fire at the ATP. And then halfway through that role, considering it's a non-executive role, I took on an executive role, which is the one I'm in currently now still, which is the commissioner of the ESL Pro League. And that kind of brings me right pretty much up to date.
Oh, very cool, very good. Oh, that's was an okay summary, but wasn't too long. So now that you're you're commissioner of the ESL Pro League, tell us a bit more about then the ESL Pro League for those who don't know it, and maybe also if you want already to expand a bit in the how is the ESL and the Pro League inserted in the esports as a whole. If you want to already give us a bit of tell us a bit about the current state of esports, that would be nice.
Yeah, so for some people this will be obvious, for some people this will be new, but esports is a super generic term and refers to competitive gaming in a whole range of different titles. And the title that I work in is Counter-Strike, which is definitely one of the longest running big esports. Most people would say it's in the top 2 or 3 esports globally.
The ESL, sorry to interrupt. So the ESL Pro League is Counter-Strike only, or CS,
that's right,
as they say. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So ESL has a long history, over 20 years in the esports business. Basically, as a tournament operator initially, they've now obviously expanded to cover a lot more services in the esports space, but they were originally effectively a tournament operator or organizer for titles. And one of the titles that they focused on was the Valve-owned game of Counter-Strike, which then became Counter-Strike Go, or CSGO, and now is in Counter-Strike 2, CS2 mode. As I said, it's a very well matured space, but it's also incredibly how do I say it? It changes a lot because it's an open ecosystem. So we're not the only circus in town. We're not the only circuit in town. Blast is another circuit that operates in Counter-Strike. PGL is another operator that creates events in the space. So there's lots and lots of independent operators who create events in that game, which is very different from the Riot model or from the Overwatch model, at least historically. Activision Blizzard and Riot. So Counter-Strike ESL has a number of Counter-Strike events. The 2 biggest ones that it has regularly is Katowice, which is in January, February time in Poland. And then in the summer, around about August time, they have IEM Cologne, which is their tentpole event. Cologne is where ESL was effectively born. And it's a huge event at the Lanxess Arena. You know, we're talking about 15, 16, 17,000 people in the stadium every day, sell out, awesome atmosphere. One of the other products that they have was the Pro League. The Pro League was a kind of a longer, so most of these events, the IEMs are like 2 weeks, 1 week or 2 weeks events. The Pro League historically was 5 or 6 weeks. And so it was a big chunk of the calendar with various knockout stages, Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D. Winners would go into a final week to do the playoffs. So when I came in as the commissioner role really had 2 very different but parallel roles. One was to look after the product, which was what I just outlined, the tournament itself, this 5 or 6 week event in the Counter-Strike calendar, usually gets all the best teams and the best players. And to look after that product, grow that product, iterate that product to make sure that it continues to be relevant, engaging, and gets the best viewership and the best players and the best teams. So that was the one half of the role. The other half is, so I call that the ESL Pro League product. The other half is what I call the ESL Pro League project. And the project was effectively an agreement called the Louvre Agreement, because it was signed in a hotel near the Louvre in Paris in 2000, at the beginning of 2000. The idea of that was, how does ESL work much more closely with some of the biggest teams in Counter-Strike? At the time, it was about 13, 14 of the biggest teams who basically signed this Louvre agreement together with ESL. And that agreement had 4 pillars. One, guaranteed participation in the ESL Pro League. It had revenue share from ESL towards the teams that participated and competed in the ESL Pro League, plus the other IEM events. It also included governance about how do we work together to improve not just our projects, but also the ecosystem. And then a kind of commitment to work on aggregated products based around joint IP. So those were the 2 pillars, or the 2 streams of my role. And yeah, it was, and although Valve is the owner of the game, there is no commissioner of the Counter-Strike scene, but effectively my role, because I worked so closely with the teams and so many of the teams, and because ESL had so many weeks in the Counter-Strike calendar, I kind of almost had a third stream, which was working independent of the membership and saying, what can we all do working together to try and improve the space, the Counter-Strike space, deal with some of its issues, and also speak with Valve as much as possible to try and communicate what we, as a bunch of very interested and invested stakeholders, felt would help improve the game, the scene, the format, the calendar, the rules, etc. So there was a whole bunch of pieces to the puzzle, really.
So you, as a commissioner, would bring all these sort of players together to understand the interests of each one and try to accommodate them. Is this more or less that? Obviously, some of those are signed under these agreements. Sounds like the Concord agreement in Formula One. But then, do you have like any also commercial? So because you on the product side, do you have any sort of commercial responsibility in terms of grow the business commercially as well? Or I mean, effectively, I think I explained very generically as I see you kind of overseeing all these conversations, all these players, but try to understand a little more the actual role. Like you get to the office, what are some things what are types of problems that you need to solve?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest part of the role that I play is stakeholder management. So my job is to liaise with the teams closely. There's currently 12 of them, and they're from all over the world, Brazil, Ukraine, America, France, and et cetera, et cetera. So my job is to kind of liaise with them and their leadership and try and understand what they're happy about, what they're not happy about, what they want to see improved. Can we create solutions to those things, whether it's in the calendar, whether it's in the format, whether it's in the, as you say, the commercialization, whether it's in a project or an initiative that we're putting together. So an example might be we have a or EFG. ESL is part of EFG. EFG is the big ESL Faceit Group company that came from a merger a few years ago. They have this Faceit product, which is all about allowing players to play together like amateur players. It's an amateur player platform. And so we wanted to try and create an agreement where the teams could participate and support and endorse and engage with fans of theirs through this platform. And so we were working in a, this was a fresh agreement to try and see what do EFG want from the teams in terms of marketing, in terms of participation, and what do the teams want back in terms of revenue share or in terms of visibility around data. And so we were basically crafting a opportunity to develop this product and the initiatives around the product to maximize fandom and to enrich the fandom so that yeah, people who play on that can show their support. They can join a club linked to the team organization. So it's really also we set up the player council, which was a formal structure created to deal directly with the athletes and the coaches to try and understand their concerns, their pain points, and to try and weave that into the conversation about what do we do around calendars, what do we do around rules. So it's really about, a lot of it was just, as I say, just stakeholder management, trying to create consensus, trying to understand, trying to create a kind of quid pro quo, seeing if solutions can be developed, whether it's political, whether it's product, whether it's initiative wise. Then there's a lot of stuff around the product, which is, well, what do we do around the product in terms of, yes, commercialization and broadcasting, although ESL have very good in-house team that kind of effectively ran that. I oversaw them, but that was their responsibility. We took a little bit more of a lead on interrogating the format and interrogating how we structure the competition and what's the tone of the way we present that competition in terms of production. Just to kind of to be a bit more specific, so IEM Cologne, IEM Katowice, big events, tentpole events. They've been in the calendar for decades, if not longer. High prize money. They're like the Grand Slams of the Counter-Strike scene. Right. We always knew that the ESL Pro League was not going to be able to compete with that in terms of prestige and, you know, that kind of full utter focus of these players where they're peaking for Cologne and Katowice. So our question was, do we let ESL Pro League just become a tier 2 Counter-Strike event, or do we try and lean into some of its characteristics and make it something actually quite unique and attractive in a very different way? So actually, that's one of the things that we rolled out, was we kind of overhauled the way we presented the ESL Pro League, from it being a let's hope that the players take this seriously and it's a great forum for competitive Counter-Strike, which it still is, because competition is always competition. You know, any athlete will always find it very difficult to not compete. But we kind of thought, actually, we've got these players on site for a huge amount of time. They are slightly relaxed than they would be for a Cologne and Katowice. How can we use that as a strength and thereby create platforms and possibilities where, for example, we can get them creating comedy sketches with our commentators and talent? Can we get them commentating on other teams' matches? Because you never normally hear a current player, you know, commentate around a match today. Yeah. And so we were giving our audiences something much more playful, something much more engaging, something much more accessible than your traditional esports event. So again, that's part of what I was tasked to do, was review the format, the tone, the production.
Right. So the ESL Pro League, is it also a company on its own, or is it a product or a competition within sort of ESL? How does that work?
Yeah, ESL Pro League is an event. It's played twice a year. It's an event on the ESL Pro Tour circuit, which is part of ESL's offering in the Counter-Strike space.
So the ESL Pro League commissioner is, say, an ESL employee, we'll say.
No. I was separate. So I was brought in to effectively be the mediator / referee between the teams and ESL. So the product belongs to ESL, but ESL effectively opened the governance doors to the teams in this vehicle where I'm the commissioner. So I have a board meeting every 2 weeks where I have 3 people from ESL and 3 people from the teams. And that's kind of part of why I got the role, was because that's very similar structure to the ATP. And so I was very familiar from my time at the ATP, where you have talent and stage around one board meeting table.
Cool. So a very independent figure helping liaise this relationship between the company or ESL, federation, if you will, or the league in this case, and the teams.
Quite strictly, because, for example, the ESL has an office in London. I don't work out of there. Fnatic, one of the teams, has an office literally 10 minutes bus down the road. I don't work out of there. It's, you know, my job is not to show and be seen to show favoritism to one side of the table or the other.
Okay. No, that's really interesting, and there's some elucidating as well. Is this a similar? I don't know if you're familiar with the role of commissioner. We hear of it, especially in American sports. You have Don Garber, for instance, with the MLS and others. Is that a very much similar role, or in that spectrum, is it a little different? Do you know?
It's a little different, I think. I think
Apart from the money involved as well.
well, very different there, but yeah, no. I mean, I feel that ultimately the commissioner it's like the CEO of the organization, right? He has a huge amount of power. He's the front facing individual for the organization, but he still answers to the ownership, right? And a lot of the
Yeah.
key decisions are made by the members or by the franchisers. And I think in that sense, there's a similarity. But in our structure, the ESL maintained kind of more direct control over commercialization and production and broadcast. That was kind of kept in house. I obviously had to oversee it. I had to scrutinize it, make sure, because of the revenue share came out of it, to make sure that it all worked and was looking after the interests of the teams in this case. But I think the commissioner in the NFL kind of oversees everything, whereas I oversaw everything, but like I say, the revenue generation and the was actually kind of almost kept to ESL for them to kind of directly be responsible for.
Right. In terms of skills that allowed you to go and perform that job, is it you mentioned that it comes a lot from the previous role that you had at ATP, is that correct?
Yeah, so there was it's about working with the board, because the board is incredibly important and they are kind of like the front line. So there's a lot of board management skills involved. Then there's the wider membership management skills, because I had 15 teams to deal with. So, and some of them are very big and huge with like they've got teams in like 9, 10, 11 titles. Some are much smaller, who are only in 2 or 3 titles. So you've got to try and create a consensus between very different organizations in terms of scale and size and capital, etc. So I think the kind of the membership management was important. The player management was really important, because that was from my ATP time. I by creating the player council and the player town halls, again, was a very direct link to the people who are, let's say, at the coalface of the sport. Um, and then there's also obviously financial budgeting. I had to look through the numbers, kick the tires on the numbers that were coming in from ESL in order to make sure that the revenue share that then goes through to the teams holds water and evolves. I also had to. We had an RFP process to bring new teams into the ESL Pro League, and we basically, me and my number 2, created the whole process from scratch. The process, the reviewing, the evaluation, the weighting, the scoring, the recommendations, the negotiations with the teams. And then publicizing it at the beginning and then at the end. So the whole RFP process was almost like a complete standalone project that took quite a lot of time and different skill set.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you mentioned a number 2 there, and obviously that type of thing that you just mentioned, maybe being responsible for an RFP, not only putting it together, but also researching and all that. Definitely, I think takes a lot of time. What's the structure that you have? Like, what's the support? Is that just you and one more person? Do you have a larger team? How does that work?
Yeah, so my direct report, I had a VP of operations, Hans Jagnow, very capable individual who's now working at a senior level at the Esports World Cup out of Riyadh. And then I had a lot of indirect reports within ESL. So like I said, I had to check the Marcoms people, I had to check the commercial partners, the broadcasting, the production, the merchandise team, the digital items team. So I think it's not the strict kind of direct report, but it's effectively there's a dotted line, I think, as most people say in these kind of org structures, between me and those individuals to make sure that I'm reviewing and evaluating and iterating all of those pieces, especially as they relate to the ESL Pro League product.
Okay. Um, And Alex, before we change subjects, well, you had experience. Well, you have some experience in more traditional sports, namely tennis, um, but others as well, with football in a football club and all that. How does that compare working in this, say, traditional sports environment and esports? If there, I mean, if it's something that you can compare, because suppose that's working football in Mexico is very different than working with tennis in Europe in any way. But but I mean, esports being a newer kid in the block there, um, how does that compare to you?
I think the fundamentals are very similar. I mean, when you're dealing with traditional sports or esports, you're looking at what are the revenues, and the revenues still tend to come from broadcast, from commercial partners, from merchandise, from ticketing and food and beverage in an event, right? So, like, we still, in esports, we are still putting on events. And whether that event is a tennis tournament or an esports tournament, the fundamentals are not that different. Then there are obviously the cost in terms of the production, in terms of the staff, in terms of the talent, in terms of the athletes. And you've got to balance the books and try and make a profit, and ideally invest that back into the product or the sport. So the fundamentals on a macro level are very similar. It's not completely like, wow, this is like a completely different language. It's from a different planet. However, there are obviously key differences, especially in the way that the community engages with the product in esports. There is a lot more of a informality that comes from the community in esports. They have a real thirst for content. So I know that traditional sports are now kind of catching up with this kind of desire for access, for content, for side content, shoulder content, for community streamers to kind of stream in world feeds, but with different overlays. But these are things where esports has kind of been leading the way in terms of how you can personalize or hyper personalize the way that you present and broadcast your product. Obviously, social media is very irreverent in esports. So there's a lot of banter, there's a lot of tongue in cheek, especially in between teams. I don't think you see that much in traditional sports, where Liverpool are going to take the piss out of Manchester United, a day or two before the match. They'll say, "Oh, big game, looking forward to it, hoping our guys win," but they don't they don't take the piss out of each other. They don't kind of in a friendly way undermine each other. And I think so. There's that because this, but as you said, because this ecosystem is quite young. A lot of the people who've worked together know each other super well, super intimately. They go for drinks together, they go to dinners together, and so as a result, while they compete incredibly aggressively and ambitiously, there is a kind of a relaxed informality to the relationships as they are amongst the teams, and the social media teams kind of rip into each other quite regularly. So I think the fundamentals, the kind of the economic, the commercial fundamentals are very similar, but I feel like the tone of the engagement is much more informal. And of course, the big difference is the amount of revenue that can be generated from digital items in and around the esports ecosystem. Something like that doesn't exist. Obviously, there were fan tokenization initiatives, which are kind of almost hybrids to try and create that connection. NFTs were a little bit about trying to create something that's non-tangible, that kind of gives you a stake in the game or gives you a feeling like you've got something. But because esports is on the computer, is a digital first product, there is a lot more flexibility with how you can create products and create connections through digital inventory on your game.
Yeah.
So a silly example, but if I'm playing a game that I'm running around with a machine gun, the team can sell me a sticker that I can put on the machine gun, and I've got a sticker of the team on the machine gun. So I've kind of branded my digital item. I've bought a digital item, which I've now put on another digital item, and when I'm playing a game with all my friends, they can now see that I'm a fan. So it's kind of like the equivalent of wearing a shirt down the pub, right? But here, this is your pub, this is your public space, and you're showing your colors, as it were.
Yeah. Very cool. Listen, just before we continue, just to let you know that there are some comments coming in. Alexis Drapier made that question. We're going to. I'm actually going to save that for a bit later. So if Alexis, you stay with us, we're going to touch on that. We have Pav watching in Birmingham, Williams in Nigeria. Pav is actually saying here, left a comment for you. ESL opening up its governance to yourself coming in. It's great to see, because sometimes innovation can be the most effective coming from outside. Yeah, for sure, brings a new perspective. That's really, really cool. I wanted actually to ask you, just moving away from esports a bit. I understand you have a new interest in paddle. Is it paddle? Is it paddle tennis? How do you say? And I want you to tell us a bit about that interest. You mentioned when we were talking before that you're investing in paddle as well. So maybe we'd like to understand that. You have a podcast that I mentioned at the opening. So I'm actually going to already tell people about that. There's look for, if you're on Spotify or something, all the angles. It's the it's Alex's podcast. So tell us a bit about that, your interest in paddle.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in the sports business for obviously a long, long time, but it's underpinned by my passion for sport. And I played football when I was very young. I played tennis in my teenage years. I played volleyball at a high level in my 20s. And then in my 30s, it kind of dropped off. I mean, I went to the gym a lot. I snowboarded once or twice a year, but I really didn't have a regular sport that I did. And I'm surprised it took me 10 years to miss it, but I did start to miss it at the beginning of my 40s. And so my brother, when he retired from tennis about 2 years ago, he played a bit of paddle, or padel, as they call it in Spanish speaking areas. And he said, look, you should, I was about to take up mixed martial arts to try and kind of do something that was sporty, social, healthy, etc. I was on the verge of going back because I did a bit of Thai boxing, Muay Thai when I was in my teenage, when I was about 17, 18. So I thought I'll go back to that. And my brother was like, look, you can go back to that any minute. Give padel a try for about a month. If you don't like it, go to MMA. But I think you'll like it. And I tried it and I never went back. And I've been playing now for nearly 2 years. I've got a club.
Your brother, by the way, is Dominic, right?
Yeah, Dominic Inglot, professional tennis player. Yeah.
Dominic Inglot, yeah.
And so, yeah, I really kind of fell in love with playing the game. I think I had a bit of a head start because I played tennis. So, there's a lot of crossover, which allowed me to kind of enjoy it pretty quickly rather than kind of fumbling around and making a lot of mistakes. Don't get me wrong, I still make a lot of mistakes, but I have the kind of the baseline sorted. Anyway, and because I got interested in the sport because of who I am and how I think, I immediately started getting interested in the business of the sport, and it was exploding in terms of the amateur participation worldwide. It was exploding in terms of the professional circuits, and I just got really fascinated by it. And again, because I'm fascinated by it, and because my background is in PR and communications in sport, I wanted to learn more about the business, and I couldn't really find that much that regularly talks about it. Like, there's no equivalent of like a Sports Pro or an iSport Connect or whatever who deal with paddle regularly. So I thought, well, if it doesn't exist, I'll do it myself. And that was where all the angles came from. It was like, how do I cover issues, developments, initiatives, concerns in the paddle business sector with some of the leading people from the kind of the people who kind of, from the markets which are known for paddle, like Spain and Argentina, as well as the new markets which are kind of really growing the sport, like America, UK, Scandinavia. Well, I mean, it's growing worldwide anyway, but
and Alex, and what are the opportunities there? Because you have probably the manufacturers, obviously, of equipment, and building courts probably is another sort of angle to have a look at it. And then the other one, I don't know if it's the more controversial one, are the professional tournaments being formed and leagues, and how there is also some sort of discussion. Is it part of tennis, or is it not? I think in some countries it is governed by tennis national tennis federations. In other places, I think they're creating their own paddle federation. So where are the main opportunities there? For instance, I don't know if you want to talk about it or disclose it. When you talk about investing in paddle, what are the angles that you see in terms of investments opportunity?
For me, the most exciting part of the paddle ecosystem is the participation piece, because the number of people who are picking it up is incredible, and the rate of that growth is pretty incredible. So anything that caters to your amateur participant, whether it's, as you said, equipment, um, apparel, tennis rackets,
Courts.
shoes, but also, as you said, court building and club operating is a real big opportunity. There's a lot of markets that are untapped, waiting for their first paddle court or even a different paddle club. If you segment the market at the moment, because the private investors are quite aggressive in this space globally, you're seeing a lot of high-end paddle facilities with big margins on the court rentals and membership. They're doing well, but they're not ideal vehicles for the dissemination of paddle to a broad group of people. It's expensive at the moment. But that's the opportunity. I think, as you said, the professional side is growing. I have my concerns about it, because I think that there is an assumption that if loads and loads of people and increasing amounts of people are playing the sport, that they're going to want to watch the sport. And I'm not sure that connection is quite as robust as people would like to believe it is. It's an opportunity for sure, but it's not a slam dunk, and it needs a lot of work and a lot of engagement and a lot of creative marketing to get people to care about the game on the TV just because they love playing it on the court. And for example, at my local court, it's a very vibrant paddle community. We've got 9 courts, so there's a lot of people in there. Occupancy is high. I'm sure that if you asked a lot of the people, do they know who Ale Galan is or Bea Gonzalez is, I'm not sure they would know. And that is a big disconnect at the moment between.
I'm assuming that they are very hot professional players at the moment.
They are. I mean, they're basically the top players on the men's and women's side, more or less. But yeah, I think there maybe the Spanish-speaking countries may know. There's a higher possibility that they'll know who these people are. But one big stumbling block is that the paddle heroes barely speak English, and therefore they really can't do interviews, they can't do content, and they can't be activated by commercial partners outside Spanish-speaking markets because they don't have the skills. And that is a big stumbling block that needs to be solved. In my podcast, I talked to some of the agents, and they were saying now it's mandatory English lessons for all their players now, because they cannot afford not to speak English.
Yeah. But it's funny. Another curious thing is, across the pond, but probably just there in the US, I think there's a very similar movement, but with pickleball, which is somewhat very similar. And I don't know if they're growing the same rates and more or less at the same time, but it feels to me that in parallel, as paddle is growing in Europe, I think more in the Middle East, it's, I think, big in Argentina and perhaps other Latin American countries too. It's growing in Brazil. In US, there's a pickleball that is a big sensation there. I think, recording similar type of growth. Don't know if you know anything about that. If there's a competition, if they can, profit from each other, or if they compete with each other. Any comments on that?
I personally feel like pickleball and paddle are slightly competitive, because people who are going to pick it up are probably going to pick one or the other to kind of commit to. That's my assumption based on kind of me, and it's kind of anecdotal. A lot of people in the industry believe there's a lot of synergies between pickleball and paddle, and they're actually creating facilities that have both paddle and pickleball, and people can kind of cross-pollinate across the sports is the way forward. Possibly. I think pickleball is very American-centric at the moment. That's not to say it doesn't exist in other countries. I know a lot of people who play in the UK. I know it's growing in a number of markets, mainly because it's really cheap. It's really cheap to put up because the infrastructure costs of a pickleball court are almost non-existent. You put up a net, you draw some lines, you can use a car park, you can use a community basketball court. It's super easy to set up. You don't need a facility. Obviously, you can have a facility, but you don't need a facility. With paddle, you can't put up glass walls and fences, and like it costs tens of thousands of dollars to put up a court. So I think we will see pickleball grow, and it will grow more and more internationally. But at the moment, I think it's very US centric, whereas paddle is almost like the rest of the world have kind of embraced it. It's big in Australia, it's big in Europe, South America, Central America. It's growing in the US as well, so it's much more global. But I think there are differences, but I 100% agree with you. I can see why a lot of people kind of think of them in the same breath.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe going back on linking what we're talking about now with esports again. So they're both, sports that are seeing rapid growth, I would say. Do you see similarities or striking similarities or perhaps differences in the growth process of esports and paddle?
Interesting you asked that question, João. It's one of my upcoming episodes on my podcast is exactly this, the lessons from hype sports. And I think paddle is a hype sport at the moment. There's no denying it. And hype is a double-edged sword. Hype is opportunity, where there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of buzz. Everyone's like, how do I get in? Where do I get in? I want to invest. I want to find money. I want to play. All of that is great. It's a huge opportunity that can be jumped on by players and businesses alike. But it's also dangerous because it can create a bubble. It can create a growth that is unsustainable or unstrategic. It can attract very money, especially from investors, that might actually come with lots of conditions that you may not be able to fulfill down the line because you're kind of making projections based on a hype rate of growth. You might have people who kind of claim to be experts who aren't experts. Doing due diligence in those spaces is incredibly challenging, especially in a new area where like no one knows who an expert is because everyone's popping up from all over the shop. So it's really about, for me, being a hype sport is about how do you try and make sure that you as an organization, your staff, and also your investors have a reasonable and stable approach to growing your initiative and also within the context of the sport. I think hype creates a very striking momentum that can it can create a bubble. And I think esports has been through a few of these cycles where everyone thought, oh, we've made it, it's going to be amazing. Oh no, we didn't quite make it, and things went badly, and then we're doing it again, and it's great, and with the huge stadiums and the investors, oh no, now we've got a problem, we can't monitor. So boom and bust, the waves of hype can keep coming, can keep breaking on the shore. And it's really important because a lot of people lose their jobs. A lot of organizations go bust at the end of these hype cycles. And I think it's critical for stakeholders and investors to try and do the due diligence to find the people who are going to survive those hype cycles and maybe even thrive in those hype cycles, because a lot of them won't. Consolidation is usually painful at the end of a hype cycle. So that's my concern with paddle, and I think it's a similar story to what happened in esports a few times.
Very, very interesting take on that. I'm happy to have asked a question that you've been thinking about for already preparing for your podcast. We have people watching us in Brazil too. Here's my man Paulo. Hello. Thanks for being there and watching us. Alex, going back a bit more like to your personal feelings about working in sport, what is it that you like the most about working in sports? And maybe if you want to add also what you dislike, if there's something that you dislike about it.
Let's start with dislike. I think sport. I mean, I don't know if this is unique to sport, but there is so much politics and self-preservation in sports and sports administration and sports business, and it can be really frustrating to deal with because it can feel incredibly obviously bad, and yet people will defend themselves or defend others to the hilt, going, no, 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 it's not a conflict of interest. No, 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 it's not an issue. No, 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 this is good. And you're like, it's not. It's not. And I know why you're saying it is, and it's not for the right reasons. And can we just be transparent and honest about it? So it's incredibly frustrating from that sense. It usually hinders progress because vested interests, especially like traditional vested interests, traditional ways of thinking about the product, the sport, are usually the things that stop innovation and stop kind of engaging with new technologies, with new fan behaviors, etc. So that inertia that comes from politics can be incredibly frustrating. And so I put a huge premium on the people who can either manage or break through that politics, because it's those who succumb to it. I understand why they do it, but they are not the leaders. And those who can break through it or manage it or harness it, those are like the sports administrators that you need to either be or follow, because they are really top operators. What do I love about working in sport? I mean, it feels pretty obvious, but I mean, sport is in my blood. My father was a professional football player in Poland, so sport has always been a big part of my life. When my brother took up tennis, it became an even bigger part of my life as I tried to compete with him and try and beat him, even though I couldn't keep up with him. He's 5 years younger. It was definitely very embarrassing. But I love sport. And I'm not saying, I think it's really important to say a love of sport or playing sport is not enough to be good at working in the sports business, but it definitely helps. It definitely helps because it gives you an extra chunk of motivation, enthusiasm that you can use to fuel your creativity, your stamina, it really can make you do a better job than you would do than if you were working for a crisp factory or a estate agent or something where you just aren't passionate. And I think that passion makes a huge difference. So I'm blessed to be able to do work that enables me to then go to Cologne and witness IEM Cologne in person and feel the goosebumps and see the atmosphere, or go to Wimbledon final and watch Novak Djokovic lift a trophy. All of these things they just make it's like the icing on the cake, and it really makes all the difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think what people need to understand is that, as you said, passion, I think, really helps you perform at your job. Also because, you work on weekends, you work late and all that. But that doesn't necessarily will help you get a job, because usually everybody who's applying for a job against you are as passionate about sport as you are. So people need to understand a bit that difference. Alex, just for me to know, do you have a hard stop? Because we're actually reaching the hour in about 5 minutes. Okay, so there's a few more questions for us to cover. There's one about education. So we did the FIFA Master in different years. I think I did several years before you, but there you go. Alexis Grapier says, what is your opinion for sports and education school? What did you do? So I don't know if you mentioned the FIFA Master Program right at the start. Maybe you can talk about the importance of, say, formal education, in general, to work in sports, and then you can also share a bit of your experience of doing a master's in sports specifically.
Yeah, I think nowadays in sport, academic education is really important. I mean, sport is now so much more complex than it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago, where you've got like private equity, you've got investors, venture capital. The revenues are so much bigger than they ever were before. The costs are so much bigger than they were. The politics is so much more daunting and so much more pervasive. So sport, like I'm even going before that, was almost sleepy compared to what it is now. It's so fast moving and so high risk and high reward that you kind of really need a grounding, whether it's in financial understanding and accounting, whether it's in terms of law and legal abilities. Those are kind of two core skills that I think will never hurt you, actually, almost in any industry, but they definitely won't hurt you in sport. Of course, you can do a marketing degree, you can do all of these other degrees that are a bit more niche and a bit more specific if that's where you want to end up. But yeah, I did a law degree and I find it to be incredibly useful in terms of attention to detail, writing. I review contracts all the time, even though there hasn't been the word lawyer in my title since 2009. I've been looking at contracts my whole career because it's always there. The FIFA Master for me, so I did the FIFA Master in 2009 to 10. For me, it was crucial to kind of create a visible pivot in my career from pure law into sport. And obviously the FIFA Master does sports law, sports governance, sports administration, sports management, sports history. It covers a lot of areas. There might be other courses that are more specific, but I actually thought this was a really good way for me to understand, where do I want to focus? Do I want to go into marketing, or do I want to go into law and governance? So it really kind of gave me a window into the key pillars of sports business and administration in today's world. And yeah, I think it was really great. When we were in Switzerland, we got to visit and talk to some of the people leading some of the biggest sports organizations in the world, whether it was the IOC, FIFA, UEFA. When we were in Leicester, we did a lot of history to try and understand how sports developed to where they are today, whether it was cricket or whether it was football, and then you meet for me, the FIFA Master, the true strength of the FIFA Master is the people that you meet and the people that you study with. At the beginning of this episode, you will have heard how all along my career, FIFA Master people that I studied with have played some role in either pointing me in the right direction or introducing me to the right person or having experience in the area that I'm looking at. That is just invaluable. And so alumni networks are, especially with your own year, because you were in the trenches together for a year or whatever it is, but even people beyond, Zhao was not in my year. He asked me to do this podcast. I don't even think twice because we're FIFA Master alumni. That doesn't necessarily happen with any old podcast or with anybody else, because we've been through the same thing. There is a kind of brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternity that comes from doing a course together. And I bump into Zhao at least once or twice a year at various conferences, events, gatherings, and we catch up formally and informally, business and socially. So for me, that I think it's definitely and of course, look, training on the job is critical. That's the third piece of the pillar that academics will not help you with. But an academic foundation, relationships are two pillars that are well catered for by FIFA Masters or a similar kind of course. And then it's experience on the job, because academia will never prepare you for life in the trenches and dealing with the realities of situations evolving.
Right. Yeah, I can't agree more. Can't agree more. Do you? Is there one particular piece of advice that you usually give to people? I imagine that a lot of people come up to you and either on LinkedIn or at conferences or whatever. Well, conferences they're normally already working with, but perhaps on LinkedIn or other ways, and ask you, I'd like to start a career in sports. I like what you did. Is there a particular piece of advice that you usually share with people wanting to start?
It's really interesting because I've got two, but they're almost contradictory. Almost, not actually contradictory. But one of the things I say is, you would be amazed how every little bit of experience and project and initiative that you work on will help you somewhere down the line. Like you will do a 1 day's work at an NBA event, or you will do a month's internship at a sports marketing agency, and you may think that's never going to help me, and maybe it was a waste of time, or maybe it wasn't even in sport. Maybe it was something that you did that was, event management there, or legal. Everything helps. Everything will help. That there will be a bit of knowledge, or someone you meet, or an experience, or a skill that you acquire that will help you in your career. So I think, do not lightly discount things that you go through or experiences that you take. I remember when I was on the FIFA Master, we went to help at a friendly match. This was before the World Cup, so it was before the 2010 World Cup. Ivory Coast came to play a friendly match against FC Lausanne, and me and Travis went and basically we did lanyards. Right, there is nothing sexy and high end about literally putting passes on lanyards, passes on lanyards, passes on lanyards. But because I was there, I met Sven-Goran Eriksson, who was at the time the manager of Ivory Coast. Before that, had been manager of England, and yeah, we had a really good conversation. A few days later, he invited me to the hotel. We had a conversation. He gave me some kit. So I've got some Ivory Coast kit, which I still have to this day. And he just talked to me about, his time as being an England manager, which, like, I would have, if someone had said, hey, can you go and do lanyards for a day? Then I would have been like, Jesus, that sounds awful. But you never know where something can take you and what it opens up. So that's one piece of advice. And the other piece of advice is, and I remember I went to an interview at the NFL, NFL UK, and I came in full of enthusiasm. I spent the first half hour basically saying, "I'll do anything. I can do this, I can do that. I love this, I love that. Whatever you need me to do, I can do it." And he said, "Listen, I'm going to stop you there. First of all, I'm not giving you any job. Second of all, I'm going to coach you. What you need to do is focus on something. Even when you're at the beginning of your career and you think that you don't really have a right to focus on something and you want to try and keep as many doors open as possible, it doesn't work. You have to go and back your sport or back your team or back your vertical and go, this is what I am. This is where I want to go. And I'm going to fully push in this direction. And this is what I'm committed to. I can't do this other stuff. I don't want to do this other stuff. I'm a marketing guy. I love marketing. I'm marketing through and through, because sometimes, especially at the beginning of the journey, you really want to be a people pleaser. You really want to get your foot in any door, and it just doesn't work.
Listen, I think everybody can relate with that. I think this is incredible advice. I can relate with actually both things that you said, and they do. As you say, I think they are excellent advice, both of them. But they do indeed sound a bit contradictory. I'd like to know, how do you reconcile them?
Because the thing with the first piece of advice is, if you look at it as a pure skill set, you will go, oh, look, Alex is doing all kinds of different things. But you would be amazed how, if you, let's say that you're focused on one space, all of those different experiences can be repurposed or refocused to be relevant to the direction that you want to head in. So it's not about going, I did marketing, I did communications, I did sales, I did governance, I can do anything. It's more like, I really am interested in administration. And as a result, as an administrator, you need to supervise the commercial department. So I understand a bit about the commercial department. I understand about governance because I did this. And so governance is a critical piece of that project as well. So I think, but I take your point in the sense that it may seem like I'm asking people to kind of try everything, but then focus on one thing. But I think it's when you go and sell yourself, try and be specific, because you're trying to solve a problem for someone.
Dude, I think it's fantastic. Actually, it was really, really nice. I work with advising sort of people all the time. I'm not really trained to give advice. I'm not a coach or anything, but obviously we try to help as much as we can. And this was probably the best way someone puts those two different things. And to summarize, I think the way I understand is, it's important that you know where you want to go. So you kind of have a north. You can maybe two options is not too much, right? Or so, but you can really focus and think that you can do everything. So it's important to have a north. But once you have that, all those multiple experiences can be really valuable for that place where you want to go. That's what I understood, and I think it's a great way to put it. I was never able to, put it this way. Great. I think this was super useful. Also to me, I pretty much know, I think, where I'm going at this point, but to help actually explain and help people the way I do. So that was great, man. Thanks for it. We're going to start to wrap up. There's a few things here. What else? So Pav mentioned on the Joy of Paddle podcast. I saw you started your own podcast in paddle. Yeah, we just talked about that. All the angles. When it comes to creating a podcast or content to plug a gap in the market, was it easy to do as the gap was there, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I have the luxury of not looking at this podcast as a kind of financial money spinner or I need it for my career. And so, I have the luxury that I don't need to monetize it. I'm not fixated on the viewership numbers and the subscriber numbers and the likes. It's something that I find interesting. I love the paddle industry. I invest in the paddle industry. I use it to try and help me understand the paddle industry better. So it was easy to spot because I wasn't getting what I wanted to find. And so I thought that's the key to launching anything, is when you think of something and go, I could really use this. It doesn't exist. Is anyone else interested in this thing? And then you go, whether it's a product or a service or a podcast or a content, it's the same principle. And so I don't think I'm the most entrepreneurial person in the world, but I think if you find something that you find interesting but isn't catered for by anybody else, or not the way you would like to do it, or you think your way would be more interesting, give it a go. Like I said, I am afforded the luxury of not having to rely on it to build a career or pay my bills. But then that kind of gives me the maximum freedom to kind of experiment and do what I want with it and get the people that I want on it and be patient about it.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And also, I think it's a good point. Whenever you do something like a podcast or something like that, many people, I think, are making money with it, but it's not necessarily the objective when you start, or perhaps even if you continue. I mean, I'm going to close near 100 episodes, and there's many other reasons to do that. Unfortunately, financially, it's not one of them yet. Who knows in the future? But it's a great way. I mean, for you to keep your mission. You want to help people. But more than that as well, you can help people in a way that I don't have to do that much work, because it's not me having to learn and teaching people, so I can invite experts like I invite you. So it's nice to be out there. So I think it's good branding for the business, but also on the personal level. You mentioned, right, that we meet each other once or twice a year, but it's always like during sort of events. So we have a quick chat here, a quick chat there, or even if we stop to have a drink, normally there's more people, so we talk, it's a different type of conversation. One of the reasons I like to do this, I already explained, the altruistic reasons, wanting to help and all, but for me, it's also a pleasure to be able to go and have an hour conversation with someone like you. Like, I don't think we ever sat down and had this kind of chat. So for me, learning even about my friends as well, it's really rewarding. So there's many reasons, Pav, why you, I think, would go and start a podcast. Don't know if you agree.
Me? Yeah. I mean, like I said, what are your objectives? That's the first thing to think. It's not just about, I want to create a podcast. It's because podcasts are not, Zhao's right. It's not a huge amount of work, but it is some work. You've got to, you've got to organize it. You've got to coordinate it. You've got to prepare for it. You need to do the visuals for it. You need to upload it. You need to market it. It's, I don't think Zhao's got a team. I certainly don't have a team behind me doing any of it. So I do it all myself, and it takes a bit of time, especially in the evenings, because I've got a full-time job. So it does. You don't do it lightly, and try and plan. Like, don't just launch it. Think, right, what would my first 10 episodes look like? What would I cover? Who would I invite? And then when you think you've got 10 episodes, then I think it's worth a go, because then stuff will flow from there. But if you can't think of an episode or two, then it's probably not worth doing. But yeah, what are you trying to do? What's your objective with the podcast? And who's your audience? And do you think they will resonate with those objectives? If you do, that's what I say. But for me, all the angles is about bridging between the old world and the new world of paddle. It's the legacy of Spain and Argentina, and the new excitement and new frontier of England and America and the Middle East and Scandinavia. And it's about giving insights about the business of paddle. That's it. It's not much more complicated than that. Speaking to some of the experts on some of the key issues in the growing industry of paddle, and I think that's interesting. And some people will. I am very aware that my podcast is not going to get millions of followers, but that doesn't matter to me.
For sure, yeah, 100%. There's a comment here from Izuchukwu Obidike. Sorry if I slaughtered your name, man. That I'd like to address. He says the cost of these masters in sports management courses put the likes of me who desire them but succumb from economic disadvantage environments an Herculean position. You're right. It is difficult. Most of them are quite expensive, but also I can tell you that most of them will have some scholarships. Not for everyone, but they will offer some, which means that it's not easy. Even like if you're paying to take a course like that, it may be already hard to get in. So if you request a scholarship, it might be even harder, but it's definitely not impossible. Many people who did it. We did the FIFA Master. I know that they do have a few scholarships to offer, so you can go and take a look at that. Otherwise,
I had 2 in my year, definitely benefited the group, because we had one guy from Zimbabwe and another guy from Rwanda, I think, who came and were on our course. And the guy from Zimbabwe now works, I think, at FIFA off the back of the course.
It's Solomon, right? Yeah, we had. I had an episode with him a while back. So if you guys want to check it out, just go to our playlist.
Yeah, Solomon Mudegi, check it out.
Solomon Mudegi, great guy. And if you want to go and check sort of other sort of programs, we do have a quiz where you put things that you want to study. If it's online, if it's in person, if it's football specific, if it's all sports. There's a short quiz there, 10 questions, and that will suggest you a few courses to look into. So if you want to go and check iworkinsport.com/quiz, do that. Let me try to wrap this up, Alex. Just there's just a couple more. Maybe I'd like you to share with us. You've been working in sports. You have also a brother who plays for professional tennis. I think played with Andy Murray and all. How was he ranked in Britain? Quite high, I suppose.
In Britain, I think at one point he was definitely number 1 in doubles. He played doubles, so he was. I think his highest ranking in the world was, I think, 18 in the world in doubles.
In doubles, cool, really, really cool. But anyway. That wasn't the question. The question is, what's the best story that you have experienced thanks to you working in sport?
What? Maybe this is a bit specific, and maybe some people won't get it. But so when I was on the ATP, I got invited. One of the perks of this senior role was that I got invited to the Rolex lunch at Wimbledon one year. So you can bring your +1 to sit with other illustrious tennis people and or stakeholders in tennis in this very exclusive lunch in a room in Centre Court. Obviously, I brought my wife. As will become abundantly clear, my wife doesn't know the first thing about sport. But I invited her. She sat, and they mixed the couples up. So I was sitting, and my wife was sitting across the table from me between 2 people. One was an older gentleman, and the other was a slightly younger gentleman who was foreign from Europe, somewhere in Eastern Europe. And my wife, though she doesn't know much about sport, is very talkative and very social. So she started talking to the older chap, and they were having a great conversation. And she said, "So how are you connected to tennis?" And and he goes, "Oh well, I'm the previous chairman, president of the All England Lawn Tennis Club." And she goes, "Wow, and where's that?" Which is really bad because, in case I need to explain it to anyone, Wimbledon is hosted at the All England Lawn Tennis Club. We were in the All England Lawn Tennis Club, so I think
SW19.
exactly. I think you could probably count on one hand the number of people on site at Wimbledon at that tournament who would not know what the All England Lawn Tennis Club is. But that was my wife, so that was a bit awkward. And then she turned to the other side and she said, and after the embarrassment somewhat subdued, she goes, and how are you connected to tennis? And she goes, and he said, I am the agent of Grigor Dimitrov. And she said, excellent. Who's he? And she was literally, I cannot make this up, she was literally sitting underneath a huge picture of Grigor Dimitrov showing his Rolex watch as part of the Rolex suite. And the guy just went, that's him. So yeah, my wife truly showcasing her utter ignorance when it comes to tennis in a setting that was somewhat embarrassing for me. But yeah, my wife laughed it off. Everyone laughed it off.
It's a good story to tell. And what's your favorite sporting moment then?
Favorite sporting moment? I mean, I'd probably say my brother winning the Davis Cup in 2015. So they went to Belgium and played in the finals. Actually, I mean, I was incredibly proud when there was loads of pictures of him from Belgium where they won the final. But I was most surprised by the first match of that year. So they went up to Glasgow to play against America, and my brother played in the doubles with Jamie Murray in a 5-set match. And I've got to be honest, even though I was a massive tennis fan, I was never a Davis Cup fan. I just didn't get it. I just thought it was irrelevant. No one cares. I just didn't get it. And I went to Glasgow for the Davis Cup, and the atmosphere was awesome. I was like converted. I thought, now I get it. Now I understand it. Because my brother was always like, I'm so proud of playing in the Davis Cup. I was like, what are you talking about? It's just getting in the way of your ATP tournaments and your Grand Slams. And then when I got to Glasgow, I really understood it. The atmosphere was incredible all the way through the 5-set match. He lost to the Bryan brothers, which was a tough but close match. But they won. Britain won, and then they went on to win the whole thing. So for me, that year, 2015 was the Davis Cup year, where I finally realized what it meant.
Cool. Well, but in Glasgow, I think everything is fun to watch. The crowd there is it's cool.
The Scots getting behind the Murray brothers, that's an atmosphere you don't need to describe anymore, because they don't get many chances to see the Murrays play tennis up there. So when the Murrays and the LTA took it up to Glasgow, it was a big deal.
They're great fans at anything, really. Lastly, so last one to go, I always or almost always ask my guests that if there is any book that you'd like to recommend to our audience, or if not, I mean, a YouTube channel, perhaps a podcast.
Well, obviously I'm going to recommend my own one, alltheangles.biz. If you're interested in paddle at all, give it a listen. If you're not, you might find it a little bit boring, but maybe this is the way you get into paddle. So I would definitely recommend that. I would recommend Unofficial Partner Podcast, which is a product created by a chap called Richard Gillis, who's incredibly smart but incredibly irreverent. He's very dry, British sense of humor, and he has a podcast, but he also has a newsletter. Subscribe to all of it. It's a really good way of staying abreast of developments in the sports business generally. And for book, I would go with Sports Perfect Storm by Roger Mitchell. Roger is, again, incredibly smart. He comes from a financial background, so he's written this kind of financial textbook meets sports fortune telling. he's bearish on sport. He thinks sport is about to go through a very, very difficult time. The sport industry is about to go through a very difficult time. His argument is that they've enjoyed a lot of good times on the back of huge media contracts that have been kind of basically almost all sports have enjoyed. And he says that's going to stop if it hasn't stopped already, but it's going to get much harder now. And so a lot of sports are going to face really difficult times. But the book is incredibly knowledgeable. There's a lot of like the middle of the book is incredibly financially heavy. So you can feel like a change in the speed and tone of the book. But Roger does he does a fantastic newsletter every week for, I think it's called Albaciara. It's his company or his consultancy, and he writes a column every week. He's also a guest usually on Are You Not Entertained podcast, which is also a very good podcast around the sports business. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Roger and the way he thinks and analyzes the sports industry.
All right. That's great. Great tips, Alex. I cannot thank you enough for being here. Just to say that there's also Daniel Gajev and Marina Pessegueiro saying hi as well. Thank you to everyone that participated, asked questions, had your comments here. Thanks for joining us. And Alex, thanks a lot. And I hope to see you in some other conference sometime soon.
Sure. Thanks, Shal, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Cool, man. Just stay there 1 minute more while I finish this, and we'll talk in a second. Bye-bye, everyone. See you, I think, in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.